Good afternoon, everyone. Afternoon. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Everyone has their own fears, from monsters under the bed, vampires at the window, and for some of us, skeletons in our closets. And most people in life tend to hide away or shy from their fears, but those who don't wish to delve into ways that they never thought possible, using all forms of method, whether natural or supernatural. The one few things.
Could you speak up, please?
Oh, can you not hear me? I'm so sorry. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, you are a bit.
All right, I'm just pick this up. All right, hi, everyone. It's my voice. For those of us who wish to delve into the world of the occult when it comes to our role-playing games, nothing helps really bring about the idea of the macabre than horror. But the question is, how is it that one is able to meld both things into one to make it and create a exciting and terrifying experience for our audience and our players? My name is Lloyd, and I'm here with four of the greatest minds when it comes to the occult and horror, who will be taking us through a lovely panel where we'll describe how to bring these things into the games that we play. If you'd like to introduce yourself, starting from my left, working your way down.
Hello, my name is Lynne Hardy. I am the line editor for the Rivers of London game for Chaosium, but I'm also the associate editor for the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, and have worked on that for many years now.
Hello, I'm Charlie Menzies. I'm the creative director over at Parable Games and the lead writer and creator of Shiver, a role-playing game in Tales of the Unknown, a kind of horror movie, RPG, and various other spooky games.
Hi, I'm Paolo Greco. I'm behind Lost Pages. Lost Pages is a small press devoted to mostly spellbooks, the occult, and mysticism and horror.
Hi, I'm Graybeaton. I'm the man behind the system S5S at the moment for Slay Industries. We do sci-fi horror.
I'm sorry, but I must keep grabbing the microphone. I do apologize. So with that in mind, I would like to start us off by essentially defining what it means to mix occult and horror together, if we could. Starting from you, Lynn?
Oh, you do start with some good questions, don't you? So it's still early, for heaven's sake. It's just as well, I love you. Horror and the occult have been tied together in the popular imagination for a very long time. Not to say that all occult is necessarily horrific, but I think in the public imagination the two go hand in hand. And again, it's that sort of the unknown, trying to get power over the unknown so you can control it and lessen its fear and its hold on you, I think is an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree. It's that you can kind of conquer fear through having understanding, and the occult, kind of compared to other things, is you're delving into the unknown in order to gain something. It's not a necessarily like a belief kind of in a higher power. It's sometimes more transactional, more research led, more investigative led. It requires action from those who want to delve into the occult, which makes it a very good bedfellow for games, I find.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially with everything that was said, but especially with this last bit. Very often in the horror genre, we see magic and the occult as only a negative force, as used by the antagonist. When used by the players, in this case players because of games, when used by the players, I would strongly recommend to get into trade-off tropes, as in like pay a price for power, or using magic without knowing the full effects, or risking unleashing magic catastrophes or side effects. Make them pay. Make them pay. Like, the point of horror, I think, for me, is you are the victim. There is an element of victimhood, and you cannot escape it. So you're either the victim of the monster or a victim of yourself.
I would go a little bit further and say that maybe you don't know you're the victim. Maybe you start off and you think you have control and everything's fine, and then one day it isn't. And that's the nature of horror.
in that same subject, when it comes to games that do involve the occult, a lot of GMs, at least as far as I've been doing my research on, have the fear that perhaps giving too much power to the players might end the campaign a little bit early. How is it that you're able to regulate a game to make sure that horror and the occult stay in a level that both matches what the players are doing and gives them that little bit extra power to make them pay without going into an instant TPK?
Well, I mean, Call of Cthulhu, basically, yes, you can learn magic. It's never going to end well for you. It's what Paolo was saying. It's the fact that there is a cost to this. So yes, you can gain that power. It will give you a certain degree of control. But, you know, once you start, you are on a slippery slope and there is no getting back up from it.
Yes, I think Paolo's completely right in terms of the occult should always have a cost, a transactional nature in the sense of if any of you are kind of like familiar with like the ideas of like alchemy with the whole equivalent exchange, something that goes in kind of has to have something kind of coming out in order to get some form of reaction, something that you want. And it isn't always necessarily what you want that happens. And I think that is the best way to kind of think about it and use it to build tension, that your players should never be 100% sure what the outcome's going to be. They know what they want, but it's always good to give them something that they don't expect. I mean, for us in Shiver, we use a tension building mechanic called the Doom Clock, where if you're using occult abilities, it ticks up minutes, and at 15-minute markers, horror movie events happen. But for us, it is more of a you're kind of actually approaching the line of the normal world and the occult world. So as your understanding becomes kind of closer to kind of what's happening, the consequences become more dire in the world around you, as well as the immediate actions of if you read from the Necronomicon.
I think this is a wider problem than the occult. So the occult has its own vibe. If you play a horror occult game, it has like magic is dire. But the same problem happens also in what they call golden age magic games, where like you're playing a wizard in a golden age where magic is great and it's progress and like it enriches everybody. Too much power will also bring unwanted consequences. And we are mere humans, so when we unleash power, if it's too much, will just run off. Like it's the way it is. Even like something amazing like making crops that are less susceptible to pests might lead to overpopulation or to bad outcomes in some bizarre way. But in this specific case, what I find is that you need to tempt the players into overextending. And I swear, I have a game, in most of my games, even Golden Age ones, you can cast some magic basically without cost. And when you run out of that amount of magic, you can cast magic running risks, and player always get there so fast. So if there is that trade-off, excellent. You are in a fertile zone for what they call bullshit. Bullshit generates amazing play.
Entirely true. You should never kill a character unnecessarily. That's too easy. They don't suffer enough. And everyone here is talking about magic as if it's something you buy, when it's not necessarily something you buy, it's something you rent. And you don't pay once, you pay twice, or 3 times, or 1,000 times over. And your story is the payment. If they become overpowered and they perform amazing deeds, they become Aladdin from the Genie's Cave, well, the story isn't that they've got the kingdom. The story is that they're a terrible ruler. And you deal with that. And sometimes the cost isn't occult at all. It's just the fact that they have to deal with the consequences of what they've done. So yeah, don't kill them. You can do much better than that.
On the subject of the occult, hi, it's me again, don't worry, I won't be here for too long, don't worry. On the subject of occult, what exactly makes something to become exactly occult? For example, if you're making a game and it's in let's say like medieval times, things that are occult are a lot less seen in one way as they are if it was taken in sci-fi times, or taken in modern times, or taken even like 100 years ago in the old Wild West stuff. What exactly makes something like, oh, okay, we've now hit the occult bar, and not that, this is just my normal magic system bar.
That's a really good thing to think about, because defining anything is always tricky, because obviously in a game you want to make sure people have lots of space to do what they want to do. I suppose from a Western point of view, occult is anything that's usually outside the Christian worldview. But it can also include devils and demons and what have you as well. So it's kind of like anything that's outside the established mainstream view that gives you power or knowledge that people might be afraid of or wary of, which gives you a big scope to go at, to be quite honest. But I'd be interested to hear what the other panellists think about, what are their definitions of the occult? Where do they draw that line?
I think it always depends where you're setting your story. So if you kind of have a magic-rich fantasy world compared to 1980s teenagers like a camp by a lake, your kind of level of occult really kind of starts to change. I completely agree with Lynne of that. It's very much whatever the leading kind of like system of belief and what I would say knowledge base of the world that you're setting in. Things that step outside of that, for better, for worse, whether it's kind of right hand, left hand, whatever kind of path of magic or occult you want to go down, if it's outside of that, then it becomes a cult. It's always something that's on the fringe, something that has to be searched for, found in a hidden book, delved into the basement to kind of go and find. And that doesn't just go for our kind of more kind of usual fantasy settings or kind of modern day settings. I mean, it can even go for sci-fi as well. I think it was Arthur C. Clarke who said that technology kind of beyond our own ken of understanding can seem like magic. So in terms of that, technology and science can actually become a cult depending on your viewpoint of where your knowledge base of understanding is.
Yeah, 100%. There is this whole thing about how did you manage to do that with a computer? What are you, a wizard? Hidden knowledge is occult. Now we call occult what we call occult because we come from a Western European Christian society. What was, Anatolia 2,000 years ago was conditioned by instead a Hellenistic worldview with a mingle of different religions, like could be a mixture of Greek, Mitraic, Egyptian, Jewish folklore all blended together. We still go to wizards, card readers, palm readers, tarot readers, whatever, for exactly the same reasons. Because we have problems with our ordinary knowledge we can't deal with. So we go to specialists that do strange things we don't understand. And occult means like hidden. That technology is like hidden from us. So yeah, secret craft.
It is very much about the ignorance of the person who's investigating it. I mean, when you consider a regular magic system, like say, the old chestnut D&D, it's all about certainty. You do X, Y happens. With the occult, you do X, X, Y, Z happens. And you don't know if you do this tomorrow, the same thing will happen. You've got to really try and work out the rules yourself. There's a phenomenal game, Unknown Armies, which takes that and runs with it completely, where it's down to the individual and what they think should happen as to how the magic system works. And when it comes to the occult, when you think about people pouring through dusty tomes, a lot of the time they're having to work out what it's actually trying to say through dense metaphor. So yeah, I think the occult is all about not knowing what you're doing.
I'm going to delve into something a little bit more problematic here because that's the only reason they put me on this panel, so we're going to do it. Listen, I'm not like the second black guy here. We need to do something. So, a lot of the occult in its originality is fear of the unknown. a lot of that comes from people's ideals and ideas, from racism, from like any kind of phobia, from fear of what people are. We all, like anyone here who doesn't know who Lovecraft is, I'm assuming you're up there, you don't need me to update you. How do you separate that start of things from the occult into things of horror, that place where Cthulhu started, with modern day horror and the occult to make it less problematic? I'm not saying it's not, that's not happening, but how do you make it less problematic so you can use it in your games without feeling like you're just adding more to the fire?
Obviously, working on Call of Cthulhu, this is something we have to address. Lovecraft was an obnoxious, horrible person with vile views. Even Robert E. Howard thought he was going a bit far, and let's face it, some of Conan's rather dodgy. So, yeah, and as a starting point, it's deeply problematical. The interesting thing with the mythos, though, is, okay, Lovecraft started it, but it wasn't just him. It was always a shared world. Other people put into it. It reflected very much, the early stories certainly reflected very much his fears, his bigotry. But it's not his mythos anymore, it's our mythos. And it's up to us to subvert it and use it to examine our fears and our prejudices and confront them. And I mentioned this on yesterday's panel as well, but you know, the more we subvert it, the more Howard is hopefully spinning in his grave. And if we get him spinning fast enough, we might be able to solve the world's energy crisis.
Yes.
Certainly not at my age.
So I completely agree. I think it's definitely, we have to kind of take this developmental and kind of like progressive view of moving almost the practice of occult in fiction forwards and develop it to represent kind of our own kind of fears and worries, but also kind of on the flip side of that, also being true to its roots, kind of where it is necessary, not necessarily in Howard and Lovecraft, just to be clear, but I'll take a different example. So my background used to be in film and TV, and when one of the things I kind of studied was the representation of voodoo and Haitian cultures across cinema. And actually, when you look back at voodoo practices and Haitian culture, it is vastly different from the films that basically tarnished it and turned it into something as an object of a kind of black culture fear. Was what it was at the time, and was something that prevailed through cinema for a long time, and you still see echoes of it now. It's still not fully gone. White Zombie being a very, very big catalyst of that in the 40s. But when you actually go back to the root of it, of what the practice of kind of a lot of voodoo elements are actually about, it's about spiritual ancestry. It's about kind of connecting back to roots and communing with spirits in a positive way and using it as guardianship and kind of protection, not the kind of pin dolls and like all like, you know, kind of fear those people, you know, they'll be practicing dark magic, they're going to come for your families, like all of this kind of hysteria that was built up around those communities kind of in America was very much fueled from a different perspective that was tarnishing and corrupting the original root of what that occult practice was about, because it sat very much outside that very kind of staunch white Christian ecosystem that it sat within. So it was very much a cult, but the thing that you find a lot of the time with practices that are occult and are kind of on the fringe is that they are often attacked by the dominant belief system and the kind of dominant party there through fear, because there is something they fear, and they fear the unknown. And that's something we have to be very vigilant about, of protecting those roots and making sure that they are being represented in the correct and respectful way.
There is so much to say about and to supplement here. I'll try to be brief.
Please don't, I have to fill an hour.
I want to start by saying something kind of funny. Magic comes from a slur. Magic comes from essentially the Greeks saying that the Persian way of doing wizardry, as in the magic, the magus, the magi, was bad and wrong. because they really hated the Persians, because the Persians kept on invading them. And like, also now we live in a very Christian society, like despite like, you know, Western Europe drifting toward like a
Antagonistic?
No, like more like more agnostic
Okay.
society. But ostensibly, like there are still crosses on a bunch of our flags, sometimes more than one. And Christianity has this anti-wizardry stance that comes straight from Judaism, and also Islam has a part of that as well. But essentially, Judaism is where I see where it began the split between what comes from our God, as in like our team, our higher power, our personal God of our cities is great. Everybody else, demon, their priests are just wizards, false gods. This split runs deep in our intellectual society as well. So there were a bunch of like people, like university teachers in the Middle Ages that were forbidden from teaching what was called like natural philosophy, that part of it was just like astrology or like astral magic or astral alchemy. Some of them even were burnt alive for that because they kept on teaching that. But it's not always been the case. Some societies have still, I don't want to say community wizards, but for example, like in modern Iraq, people still go to the Mandeans for to get rid of the evil eye, for example. So the Mandeans are these like sort of pre-Islamic culture in the Middle East. Like I'm super simplifying it, but basically they are still sort of within civil society, but their women are still doing magic rites. And funny enough, like one of these rites, I'm simplifying it a lot, they give up like some oil to a dying person, as in like a bottle of oil to a dying person. And when they die, they just ask them, like, when you go to the afterlife, just ask what's behind to bless the oil. And that's using the rites nowadays. And it's like more complicated than this, but this is like a very simple example. Like this is like what's appropriate for a society. It really depends on the society. We also have like personal like types of magics that are totally fine, like astrology, not astronomy. I don't know why I keep on making this mistake today. I never do this. I'm really sorry, everybody. But astrology is a totally acceptable way of doing magic nowadays. Like it's not evidence-based. It's not like, it doesn't have any bearing on our understanding of reality, on our like epistemology and our evidence-based science, essentially. But we still do it. Why? Mysteries of the cosmos. And like, don't get me wrong, I make fires on the solstice twice a year. I try, at least. But like, yeah, I'm sorry, like, there is still like a space, even like within normal, rational, everyday society for some.
I have no idea what that is. Keep going.
For some magic, and I'm trying to drift, like to slowly bring in like more civic aspects of these old rites into our society. For example, like during the winter solstice, we are just happy that we survived the first half of winter, like autumn. And we have a banquet, and we decide on, and like we have a think about the things that we burn to leave behind. And that's one of the meanings of having a fire on, winter solstice.
Well, we all have our own little rituals, don't we? We all have our own little superstitions, our own little rituals, which are all, the word ritual is tied to magic, and hopefully you're going to get something out of it. The fact going to the winter, we still hang holly and ivy, which has very specific meanings. We'll all have little things that we do to try, the classic example of making sure you've got your lucky pencil when you go to do an exam, or you've got your best dice when you're going to play a role-playing game, your lucky dice. So yes, magic is all around us, whether you want to class it as a cult or not, but it's something that even as rationalised society, it's still there. It's never gone away.
I heard a great quote once that tradition is just peer pressure from the dead people. I feel that with any form of problematic author like Lovecraft, because as it's so rightly been pointed out, the man was scum. We can take the work they've done and try and take the good bits and throw away the bad. And most importantly, we can decide what's evil. And we can say, no, we're not going to have that. Thank you very much, but no. And we have to contend with the fact that the history of our species is a minefield, an absolute minefield. And Lovecraft is just one of them. I had a lovely guy come and talk to me about Occult and Cthulhu. And he decided to deride the Poles in World War II, not realizing my grandfather was Polish. And you need to correct people's misapprehensions, ideally gently. But we get to decide what's evil. And we get to decide through horror games how you thwart that.
And that was something, obviously, as the lead on Occult and Cthulhu, that we made a very deliberate decision that it's not the mythos doing it, because that lets humanity off too easily. No, this is the atrocities, the horror that was committed during World War II. That's got nothing to do with outer gods making people do that. That's people. We went with the people are trying to use the mythos to commit these hideous things. It's not the mythos causing it, because humanity doesn't deserve a get out for any of that. That's something we have to face and deal with.
Hear, hear.
I've realized that I've done a thing where I kind of made you all go one by one, and if you want to interrupt someone, as long as you're not rude about it, it's fine. Just let me know. I would like to go back slightly on the idea of ritualism, and more importantly, about putting ritualism into a game. My players already fear the concept of doing the occult because it's terrifying. But I want them to summon more demons. How do I get my horror players to summon more demons? Yes, please. Hello.
Hi, I have experience in this. One of them is the promise of power. If you put disparate people in disparate circumstances, they will reach for whatever. Especially if it's in a game, because in a game, we have to pay less for bad consequences compared to the real life. In games, we can do stupid shit like murder, and it's okay. The second thing that I found very compelling, when you write a spellbook, write it in the second person, as in you're writing a recipe book. So instead of saying, the wizard summons blah, 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 you say, to summon this demon, pick up your chalk, draw a circle on the floor with these words around, as in address the player like if they were the wizard. And for now, I don't think I have anything at all on the top of my head.
Demon's such a purgative term. I mean, really, I prefer independent contractor. My favourite way to use demons is that they don't show up in a smoky clouds offering you power. I mean, that's obvious, everyone sees that coming. But if you go down to the docks because you need to get a gun, and you're like, I really need to get a gun to protect my family, the demon's going, well, I've got this pistol, and that will do the job, but for the same price I can give you this shotgun. The demon is in offering this shotgun. In one game I had a player who was a total munchkin. Absolute total munchkin. He wanted a massive arsenal. The look of joy on his face when they gave him the man-pad was amazing. There he was with a missile. What could he do with a missile? Anything he wanted. He was plotting to blow up banks and all sorts. And then it got stolen. And the beads of perspiration when he realized his fingerprints were all over that missile. It was beautiful. Yeah, demons are just negative forces around you, and they can start off pretty mild. It could be someone really friendly who offers to help you, and then they offer to help you again, and then they need a favor back. And we're back to that transactionalism. And sometimes these favors seem really simple. Carry something from X to Y. But the X you picked it up from, the guy who came out of that house didn't live there. And now you've got a television in your arms. And you're carrying a television down a block, and you're not sure why.
To broaden it out slightly, I think from kind of like summoning demons, going down into the basement to read from the scary book, making your players step towards horror can sometimes be a challenge, even in a horror game. Some players will start to hand-wring. They will get very precious about the survivability of their character. And I think reward of power, reward of something kind of large, a good deal, is definitely something that you can kind of lean on. I think there is a really nice, very kind of human undercurrent that I always tend to use, but mixed in with all of these as well, which is you play on people's curiosity. Leave out parts, make certain things opaque, make things vague so they sound enticing, when actually the phrasing of it is more, oh, I should have read the fine print when they actually finally get to it. Is the thing is that humans are innately curious by nature. RPG players are incredibly curious by nature. If you put something that is just tempting enough, they will march into the jaws of horror to find out kind of what is at the bottom of those deep, dark stairs.
And it may be that final page of the Occult book is the health and safety warning.
and it's been torn. I have one thing that just came to mind. Maybe the demon wants something from you, and you have to pay the price. Or maybe you don't have to pay the price, and a random person has to pay the price, or many random people have to pay the price. And at that point, you are just essentially saying, yeah, it's fine, I don't care if, like, I don't know, all these people get hurt, or get misery, or if someone in my family dies, or whatever. I had these, I put these, like, idols in one of my early games, and they speak to you in your dreams, and they beg you to be fed. They beg you to be fed specific things, depending on the idol. And they have a mouth, and you put things in their mouth, and one of them grants wishes, but you have to pay the thing that is most dear to you, and it knows. The idol knows, and if the idol is not well made, it doesn't work 100% of the times. So you might have to pay the thing most dear to you, and that's the second thing most dear to you. And then maybe the third. And when does it stop?
Well, the horrible thing about the thing that's most dear to you is that it starts off being one thing, but when that's gone, something replaces it.
Yeah. And at what point you stop being you, because everything that is dear to you is gone?
Yeah, what's left?
What's left? I don't know.
Lynne, do you have anything want to add to that?
I was going to, but then they started talking about something really interesting and I forgot.
Sorry, Lynne.
Sorry.
Oh, right. So, talking about rituals mechanistically, they can be really tricky to pull off well in a game, though. Because unless you're doing a LARP and you get them all dressed up and you actually get them acting out a ritual, which, you know, have done, and it can be quite hilarious. I'll tell you a story about that after the panel. How do you actually simulate that in a game and make it interesting? And that can be really tricky. Yeah, go on, Paolo, tell us.
I forgot the ADHD medication today. So. I'm a very idiosyncratic GM. I play a mix of like slapstick and horror in a fantasy D&D world. So when my players start to do things that are, beyond the ken of mortals, they hear a shift in narration, and things start to get creepy. And creepy doesn't mean bad stuff; it means ambiguous, as in we're going to a place that we don't understand the outcome of. If we don't understand the outcome of, we're going in that indeterminate space with indeterminate payoffs, indeterminate prices, risk that we cannot evaluate. Because risk that you can evaluate is okay. We all do that. Like, we all get loans or whatever. Like, we have credit cards are quite common in the UK, I guess, or a mortgage or whatever. And we all handle risk. If you can't evaluate a situation, that's creepy. And creepiness is this indeterminate state. Like, this is what moral psychologists tell us. And it's what I find to be so scary about the kind of horror I watch. As in, like, there is this thing, this slender person slowly coming toward me, and they never met them, and they're just so weird, and I'm alone in this old house. What's going to happen? I don't know.
Yeah, and that's it really. To sort of sell a ritual well in a game, you're looking at balancing it with the mechanics. So are they succeeding at this? With that narrative element to keep that creepy, scary horror thing going. Because if you just abstract it down to the dice rolls, you're losing that interesting side of it. But if you're just going down the narrative side of it, not resolving anything, you're never going to get anywhere. And the whole point of, quite often with rituals, is they're a means to advance the story to get to that next point. And like all things, doing it well is tricky, and it's something that you get with practice, and very much depends on what your players are after as well, and where their focuses are, and what they enjoy.
I think there's also a step before the ritual, which is the gathering of items.
Mm-hmm.
And that's quite important, because if your ritual involves popping down to a Tesco and raiding the soup aisle, then it's not going to be much of a story element, unless something weird happens in the Tesco. But if you need to get jade from a tomb, then suddenly you need to find a tomb that's got jade in it. And in Falkirk, those are remarkably few and far between. Not from personal experience, I say for the lawyers, but you need to work out where to go. You need to work out how to gain access. You need to go through all these steps. And so a ritual can really be the final knot of a whole bunch of threads coming together. So rather than it being like the end of your story, it's like the start of chapter 2.
One little trick that your players will hate. Do not fully resolve payoff. Leave a dangling thread. One of my players has been cursed by raiding a temple 7 sessions ago. Every session he asks me, what the hell is going on with this curse? I have no idea. You can keep on doing the same for demon packs, as in, like, a demon will say, when someone make a deal, whatever, yeah, and they just ask you a little favor in the future. Oh, no, it's nothing that you have to worry about. You will not kill anybody or steal anything or do any crimes or do anything really bad. But, I will need, a small favor from you. And that bears on players. These dangling threads are good on both sides of, say, the GM screen.
And you can have a lot of fun with making things hard to understand. If you really want to do a demonic bargain, you go onto a website like Apple, or you go onto a website like Herbalife, and you copy their terms and conditions, and you do a find replace, and then you write it in Gothic script. It will take about 40 pages to print out, but when you hand it to your player as a prop, and they start looking through it, you've bought yourself ages of time to figure out what to do next.
I think there's a thing there with kind of actual physical handouts, in terms of the mechanical nitty gritty about how you actually run this stuff at the table. I completely agree with Lynne if you saturate something with dice rolls. We have a saying on our team at Parable of save dice rolls for tension, and in rituals that is never more important in terms of that overrolling can really kill the tension when you're kind of performing those rituals. In terms of kind of like the LARP aspects that can kind of come into it, I think it's, you don't necessarily have to get everyone in hooded cloaks and take them out to the woods and light candles and go the whole hog.
Spoil sport.
I mean,
available
I like
cheap on Temu.
I like to, but that's just me. But it's there are small things that you can easily do, like handing out a contract and having your players handshaking as they're signing that contract and giving them a time limit where they can't possibly read through all of Apple's terms and conditions means a lot more than saying you have this contract in front of you. One of the things I like to do is something with the game I've been finishing up recently. Don't play this game. It's a solo, like, cursed role-playing game. Is I've got very focused on what I would call artifacts of play, which is I'm very big on. You're doing this thing, go and make something, make a totem, fold up a bit of paper and play that. I always forget what that game's called, where you fold it up and you have all the options, but make one of those and then hand it to your GM, and then, you get to make those decisions. Having these little elements of tactility, even though they're very, very simple, they imbue a ritual with a feeling of physical consequence, which dice rolls give you a sense of that mechanical consequence and show you what way the needle may land in terms of the consequence. But having your players sign that contract, make that accursed object. I've had it where somebody's made and had to, draw something that they've seen, and you staple it to their character sheet. You really want to kind of have those firm consequences follow your players around, and a good way to do that is to physicalize it at the table with them.
It's also really funny if you can get them chanting along as well. Players chanting around the table is great. It also really freaks out all the other gaming tables in the area. Added bonus.
And then the cult chart is really just Swedish. It's really easy. Google Translate every time.
Lithuanian is also really good because it's so isolated. Part of it are kind of Latin in the way they're structured. Something that I do less horror, but I do spell books. I have an amazing horror spell book that is supposed, like many of the other spell books that I produce, is supposed to just be literally handed to the players when they find it. Make, if you have a printer, just make these handouts. Seriously. Copy paste shit. Some part of it can be lorem ipsum if you don't want to have 8 pages of content, but just make these little things. It doesn't take long to prepare. You can do it with Word. It's gonna be fine.
Aging paper is very easy, very, very easy. You use some tea, boom, done. And what's more, if you create these things and you have them on the table, then you can put actual important information into them. You can reveal who your villain is on page 7 of this 40-page handout. And when you say this as a reveal at the end of the game, the frustration, it's gorgeous.
I'm going to grab the microphone now, just in case. Hi, everyone, I'm still here. This is a bit more of a question targeted at you, Charlie. By the way, big fan. Love the way she was going so far.
Oh, thank you so much.
What happens if the magic and the occult in my world is more subtle? What if I don't have demons I want to summon? What if it's more like tiny baby hexes? What if it's more connected to giving Frankenstein a little bit of a knock in his leg so his knee doesn't work a little bit better? How do I implement that into my horror? What I like to call Stephen King occult, where a lot of Stephen King's old books like Dark Half, Desperation, it's about doing rituals on a more of a subtler scale, with a few words and a few lines, a few things here, and the impact being more subtle than anything else. How do I implement subtle occult into my games without going, oh, and by the way, you can also throw fireball?
Yeah. So I'd say with keeping stuff kind of more grounded, I would say you very much, to go back to kind of our physical artifacts, you want those to feel very much of the world. They don't want to be too flashy, too out there. Kind of anything that, that feels like it could be pulled from a library that, a bunch of 1980s Stephen King kids have wandered into and gotten on one of the old kind of machines and are flicking through. Those are the kind of artifacts that you kind of want. I think if you start drifting too far out into kind of like heavy occult stuff that feels a little too out there from the world, it starts to not sit as well. And I think the reason for this, for kind of keeping that kind of horror subtle, and it's where I think King really sits really well. As you can probably tell, I'm a big Stephen King fan, massively so, is this idea of like the uncanny valley. I think sometimes like the occult can jump kind of far to a point that it's so beyond our ken that it's more kind of in Lovecraft's domain of that unknowable horror, that's something that is so large and cosmic and beyond our knowledge, that the scale of it and the grandeur of the consequences of that even existing are the thing that's horrifying. If you want to kind of keep stuff grounded, that kind of smaller occult, it's that slender figure in the house that's kind of at a distance when you squint, looks like it could be someone you know potentially, but there's something just a little bit off, and that's the kind of thing. Also, it's just that normality, and you need to just do 5 minutes on the clock to the right or the left, and kind of just tweak that kind of element of reality that you kind of get your players feeling queasy. Queasy is the word I would use. There's that slight thing in your stomach where you see something that doesn't sit quite right out of the corner of your eye, and when you look at it firmly, it solidifies into something that you know is real. But you know when it's in your periphery, there's something that's not of this world, that's kind of firmly of this reality. But it's only, in the words of Rocky Horror Picture Show, it's only a short jump to the left or a short jump to the right. Don't go too far. And that's how I've always kept horror more grounded. And I find for some people, for some players particularly, that form of horror, because it's so close to home, is a lot more scary. Because I've had texts from players walking home from after a game night where we've kind of gone more in that realm of horror, and they're just being like, I'm not enjoying this walk home. Because it's, you know, if you base something in a, you know, you're walking home in a dark alleyway at night and you kind of meet a tall stranger in a large broad brim hat who has kind of a raspy breath, it's someone who could exist, but it is something unsettling. It's something that is just that little jump to the left. So that would be my advice for more grounded horror.
Yeah. To go to Doctor Who briefly, certainly some of Stephen Moffat's Doctor Who episodes before he went too far with the Weeping Angels. He was very good at taking something mundane and doing what Charlie said, just tweaking it ever so slightly. So the fact that it's like, well, the Weeping Angels look like statues. All statues? You know, are you watching over your shoulder every time you walk past a statue now, just in case? And that was a beautiful, very creepy, very unsettling. It's not outright horrific, it's unsettling. It challenges the players' worldviews and assumptions and just means that they're on edge. Their characters are on edge because they're not sure, is that just a statue or is that going to suddenly steal years of my life away kind of thing. Okay, not the Doctor Dances, the Empty Child, gas masks. You know, they're truly horrific with the words, "Are you my mummy?" Again, very simple, but it's that unsettling, mundane things suddenly not being quite what you thought they were, and therefore ever so slightly threatening and unnerving.
Yeah, I think it's what I would call an erosion of the trust in the mundane, of kind of like, because it is, everyone has a baseline of like kind of what they expect to happen, you know, where you go out in your kind of day to day. If you can start to chip away at that, so that your players are constantly looking over their shoulder of being like, do I need to watch myself when I'm near a statue? Do I need to, you know, be keeping a look out the corner of my eye for every little tiny thing that has been seeded as being kind of in that realm of the uncanny? Don't let your players get too comfortable trusting that everything they know is as it should be.
I have a couple of little tools for small magic. The first one is being revealed to me by some readers that told me that some of my spells are difficult to use, and all of the spells were curses, and curses are excellent because they are lingering small effects that pile on and make somebody's life terrible. Imagine a spell where you get lost, like you never not get lost. And as a player, as a person, it's terrible to always get lost. You can't go to the shops. I mean, maybe you can go to the shop. Can you make it back? Only if someone brings you back. The other thing that, like, small magic that is still usable without drifting too much is what I call, like, grounding magic. So magic that counters magic by making things more normal. For example, is the silver that kills the werewolf, or that kills, you know, the monster in Stephen King, or the Elder Sign, for example. The Elder Sign is creepy as fuck. I'm sorry, I love it, and it's great, and it does nothing. Like the fact that it does.
Absolutely useless if you don't use it correctly. Yes.
Yeah, but also it doesn't do magic. It stops bad stuff from happening. It's a grounding thing.
I think one of the important things to do when you're looking to do really tamped down horror is you don't advertise it as horror. You start off with, this is going to be a drama, it's going to have some unsettling themes, but it's largely going to be a drama. And then as you progress, you know, they meet the old woman in the street. She's an old woman in the street, she's not a witch. She's got a weird eye, there's nothing to it, she's just a person. And then when she spits on your shoe and suddenly you're cursed and your world starts to go like that, you realize you're in a horror. And it forces you to adapt to the change. And you can do that as softly as you like, or you can have it as a dramatic event. And Finner is an excellent example of this. You know, the guy gets what every heavy bloke wants. You know, you're going to lose weight. Oh, I'm sorry, it's never going to stop happening. And it goes from being a blessing to a curse. And you know, it starts off because he upsets this old guy. You know, just some guy in the street.
Coming back briefly to the subtle magic thing, again, it's referring back to the fact that we all do have our little rituals. And it's those, again, that's a subtle thing, small personal rituals that characters can be doing to protect themselves, to protect others, to ameliorate the effects of curses or other magic that's been cast. You know, you can keep things very subtle and on a low level. It all really depends on what you want out of the game, what your players want out of the game, whether you want to be doing that small, subtle, creepy stuff, or whether you want to be going for the let's go fight monsters and shoot things with shotguns kind of thing. We're very lucky with the horror genre in the fact that you can do so much inside it and evoke so many different responses, and no two horror games are going to be the same, precisely because we've got that room to play and look at different aspects of fear, horror, occult, dealing with it. Do we, you know, is it going to go down if we shoot it with a silver bullet? Or do we have to do something more creative with that silver? Or is it complete nonsense? And it's all a lie we've been sold. Kind of biscuit.
Okay, everyone, I've got one last question for our panelists, then we'll do some book recommendations, and then I'll open it up to the audience to ask all your questions that you love so much. I know you're waiting. I see your faces. So give me a sec. The last question I have has to do with safety tools in actual horror and the occult. When it comes to, there are a lot of people who are very loud estimate that as we are allowed to become monsters, we should do what we want. But as we live in a world where that is not true, nor do we live in a world where you can't just say what you want and expect everyone to go with it, what are the safety tools you bring into your games in order to keep the horror from not becoming too real, but also being just real enough that you invoke that level of fear?
There has to be a certain expectation if you're playing a horror game that there are going to be things that scare you. The thing is, it's a controlled experience so that you should be frightening the characters, genuinely frightening the characters. You should be lightly scaring the players, not utterly terrifying them and making sure they can't sleep at night. So you do have to be aware of, you do need safety tools, even in a horror game. Even more so, really, because you don't know particularly if you're running games at conventions and you don't know the people involved, you don't know what those people's experiences are, you don't know what their deepest fears are. And the last thing really that as a good GM you want to do is traumatise your players. You know, that's not a good look. It's not a nice thing to do. And you just have no idea. Some people at the table won't know until you get to that point. So having a mechanism that people can go, no, I need to step away from this, I need a break, can we take this in another direction, I think allows us to explore the horror in a safe way without it becoming problematic. So I highly advocate having safety tools in all games, but particularly horror games, because you just don't know.
Yeah. So we've had a mantra as a team, and we put it in the Shiver core rulebook of that we're here to enjoy and play horror, not be horrible. Fundamentally, it is going to the cinema to watch a horror movie, and kind of scream and generally laugh quite quickly afterwards as the popcorn gets flown in the air. There is a disconnect. Horror is there for catharsis in terms of how you experience it, not for trauma. I think kind of making sure there's that disconnect in terms of how we enjoy horror and understanding how people enjoy horror is very, very important.
It's a passive consumption, isn't it?
Exactly.
If you're at the cinema or you're reading a book, you can stop, you can leave, you can put it down, you can walk away. In a game, it's a very active participation, and it is much less easy to just stop and walk away if it becomes too much.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, for us, one of the biggest safety tools that we do in Shiver is we have quite a lot of transparency before kicking off of a story. So I'm sure all of you are really familiar when you go to cinema and you see the big BBFC card, which has all of your kind of like warnings, your age ratings, and kind of things like that. So we created our own Shiver board of classification where we did exactly the same thing, but then we also put in a watch list of films that we'd recommend, because we found that if people are relatively new to horror and they want to come to a game, they can be like, so The Lost Ship, for example, and The Cursed Library, is my love letter to John Carpenter's The Thing. I kind of put that in there. If someone goes and watches The Thing and it terrifies them and go, and they have to turn it off and that's too much for them, then they very much know it's like, okay, maybe that story's not for me. Or they can come to me and be like, these warnings are here, I'm not too sure about this. Actually, that film's a bit too intense. Will it have features of that? It's giving that pool of information for your players to engage with, whilst not spoiling the plot, just to be clear. That will give them a sense of kind of a vibe of the story and the contents of the story that they're going to be engaging with in terms of horror. It's a fine balancing act to kind of play, but I think kind of having that transparency before you begin is quite important.
I'm gonna go further on that. Foreshadowing is great because it lets players understand part of what's gonna come. It's better because it lets players understand all the possible outcomes. So if one of them is possibly gonna be, triggering or upsetting, or is gonna cause like unnecessary upset, essentially, like to the players, they can possibly like ask for veils or like tap on the X cards or whatever. Also, the other social aspect that is, I think it's important to mention, is that if you go to a horror show, like a horror movie with your friend at the cinema, you're 100% allowed to close your eyes. If you are at the table, there is a peer pressure element of performing as a player or as GM. For the GM is less a problem because you're running the game usually in more trad settings, let's say. But for players, you are supportive of the other players, and so you want to do that. And so there is this thing where you might start to think, I don't want to veil this scene because the other players might be into it, and these kind of things. If you foreshadow, it's going to help them understand that there's going to be potentially something bad for someone at the table. So that foreshadowing is great, and there's a part in Midsommar where they essentially have paintings that show the entirety of the plot, and the movie's not impoverished by that.
Yeah, just a quick thing on that, like in terms of foreshadowing. I think that's a fantastic point, is that I think people fear foreshadowing elements of the plot because you feel people aren't going to be as engaged in the story. Whilst I actually think foreshadowing and revealing some elements and giving a sense of, you know, what movie you're going to go see, as it were, actually creates stronger narrative buy-in from your players, which kind of creates stronger immersion, and also just that people know like they're going to go to this and they're going to have a good time. So don't fear foreshadowing, because it will make your players more engaged 100%.
It's like a warm-up.
I'm going to take a slightly different approach to this. I love safety tools. Love them completely. Because I have slow reactive empathy. I don't always notice that you might have a problem. And it helps. It tells me what's going on with you without you necessarily having to go, hey, you're torturing a cat. Maybe you could stop that. So there is an assumption that all of us react uniformly to horror, and that really isn't the case. And so a safety tool, when put out there, allows for communication that is very clear and direct. And it means that you can swerve bullets that you may not see coming. I had the grave misfortune when I was doing my university study of looking at some of the most god-awful things anyone could imagine. And I'm fine with it, but there's no way in hell I'd want any of you to see it. Just none. But I love the idea of throwing a vampire against you. So, safety tools help me navigate the world where I'm trying to bring you some creepiness, but not do any harm.
There is also another thing you can do, which is slowly ramp up the awful. My favorite way is to give to the wizard a spell where you can either sacrifice something like as small as a goat or a dog and see how the party reacts. Sometimes they bought goats and they never sacrificed them. They kept goats as pets around the house because they were like, no, we killed a goat last session, never again. And that was a good hint in how I could push the group.
So, I was going to do book recommendations now, but since we've just hit the hour, I think I'm going to open up to the audience for 20 minutes, and I'll come back to the last few things we're going to do, and then we're going to go from there. So, do we have any questions from the audience? All right, I see two so far. Just heads up, I'm going to say what you say again because it's recorded, so don't think I'm like just trying to talk over you. I'm going to start at the back. You at the back there. Help me out.
So I've been running a D&D 5e game for a while and coming up against, it's not a system necessarily designed for horror. So I found kind of areas and windows where it's evocative to break the normal rules and do things that don't necessarily make traditional sense within the system to kind of evoke all of those feelings of the uncanniness and struggling to understand. So yeah, I'd like to hear kind of opinions on when to kind of break the rules of the game system and then therefore like the world for the players to evoke more horror.
So to hopefully get this right, you'd like to know when it's a good time for you to insert things of the occult and horror into a game that may not necessarily be built for it?
No, specifically breaking the mechanical formulas of a game in order to kind of make horror.
Breaking the mechanics of the game to make horror. All right. Tackle this any way you want, people. You go wild, I believe in you.
I'd say whenever you feel the threat ramp and the kind of horror needs to be there, that's when you trigger your rules change. And I think with 5e, with D&D in general, it's a power fantasy. I know exactly what you're saying in terms of that. It's very difficult to generate horror at a table where your players are kind of in a ascension towards godhood, as it were, or level 20. So So in terms of kind of like how you can play around with that, I think it does very much depend on what your players are wanting to get out of the experience. You can de-level them like very suddenly. You can take things away that they're used to having and give them different, more kind of mundane tools in order to kind of get them to play a different way. I think for me, it's whatever you do, it's always pushing your players' characters to the edge of like where they're uncomfortable, where they're not feeling their kind of usual powered, like superpowered D&D selves, of that they are, you know, really, really struggling against the threat that you're putting in front of them, because you've basically taken some of their toys away and given them a cadre of different things to interact with, and being like, I need you to role play as your characters and use your characters' wits and strengths rather than their physicalized arsenal. Because I think you can have a really interesting time when you do that, because I often find doing that with kind of systems like D&D, it really brings characters to the forefront and brings characters out of their shell, because they're relying much more heavily kind of on characters. The other thing you can do, if your players don't want their kind of character sheets fiddle around with too much, is then play around with the monster side of things. We're all very familiar with stat lines and kind of set HP. What if you have a monster that when it dies, it slowly puts itself back together again and just keeps coming? And actually the thing that you need to do is not run at the monster and hit it with sticks, as you would normally do, is actually understand the monster, figure out its story, figure out its mystery, and unravel that. And once you unravel that, its limbs will stay off when you cut them.
You don't need to break the rules. You can, one, victimize the player characters. Just wail at them in ways they emotionally can't deal with their usual tools. Like, if you attack the player characters in a way that goes against the grain and how the players use the player characters, it's emotionally a difficult place to be. Second, bargain of power, it always works. Like, D&D relics or artifacts, whatever they're called in whichever edition of is used nowadays, they always have horrible prices. And like, the most mundane is everybody wants that thing once they know that you have it. And they want it bad. They want it in an aggressive way. The other thing, yes, I was in a real world cairn a few weeks ago. I went to Orkney to Cuwin, which is the cairn of the dogs. The entrance tunnel was not 10 feet by 10 feet, was 50 centimeters by 60. So imagine going in a dungeon where those are the corridors. And all of a sudden, out of the tunnels, creepies start to creep out. What do? Like, you can't run away, you're breakfast. Like, again, victimize the players. If you're breakfast, you can't escape. I believe that's how I shift from happy fantasy to horror fantasy, which are like it's my job. Like, I'm here because of that.
You can break every rule you like, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you can also stick to the rules. Everybody thinks they get to rest. Well, I've got an 8-year-old daughter who likes to wake up at 3:30 a.m. For last month, 7 o'clock was a lion. D&D relies upon rest. Oh, I'm running out of spells. I need to take a nap for 8 hours. Oh, do you? That's nice. Well, 4 hours have gone by and you're woken up. There's something knocking on the door. There's something creeping around the corner. Oh, you're resting in a spider-filled cave. It's stung you and woken you. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you not get your spells back? The loss of utility, which is just around the corner. They can see it. They can just reach it and touch it. I ran an adventure set in a dwarven mine where they went for 4 days without rest, and they wound up on exhaustion penalties galore. And when they got out, and the reward was they could sleep and get all of their toys back. Well, I just said, no, you know how I feel.
Yeah, this is pretty much one of the ways of achieving going against the grain of how players deal with problems.
Yeah. I was going to say, on how players deal with problems, I think especially for D&D as well, you'll find people will want to run towards enemies and try and fight, because it's generally the mode of the game. So how do you make people run away? In Shiver, we've written about this, but it's something you can apply to D&D, I think, as well, really easily. To kind of condense it a bit, have you all seen Deep Blue Sea, the shark movie? A spoiler for anyone who's not seen it, Samuel Jackson gets absolutely straight up murdered quite early on in the film by a giant shark.
Yeah. It lasted longer than we were expecting.
Yeah.
Warn about spoilers and then say the spoiler.
I know. I'm sorry, but to make my point is that you have introduce a big cast NPC who's more powerful than the players, is super capable. If you can, make them likable, but whether players like an NPC is a roll of the dice sometimes. And then introduce your monster and instantly have them kill them. No rolls, no muss, no fuss. They are absolutely immolated in usually a bad and pretty gruesome way. And that is a real... mostly sure, unless they really love them and they want revenge, it's a pretty surefire way to get your players to run away. Because I think in a power fantasy game, that is one of the biggest struggles, is getting your players to understand when combat isn't the best option. So yes, Deep Blue Sea, some people. That's my advice. Yeah. Sorry for the spoiler.
Some characters.
Yeah.
Very important.
It's
Characters.
Yes, characters. Yes. NPCs. Yeah.
Don't change it.
Don't do crimes, people.
But even though we have kind of given the game away with Deep Blue Sea, it is worth watching for how they set that character up and then pull him away. Because it really does unsettle the people who are left and leaves them questioning oh my God, how are we going to get out of this situation now? So yeah, it's a very good example.
Thank you.
To echo really what Ben said, is the fact that the rules are there to support the storytelling, not dictate it. So if you need to just put them to one side to create the atmosphere that you need, it's your game. You do what you need to help create that story.
All right, we've got some more time for questions. We have 2 more. We're gonna try and keep it within 5 minutes, everyone, this time. All right, love you all. Let's start with you right there.
In a setting that's high fantasy, like traditional D&D or Pathfinder, how do you navigate introducing something spooky? You enter the house and there's a mist that kind of looks like a person, and it wafts through the house, and you're like, is it a ghost? Is it not? When one of the characters goes, oh, but I've got a 2nd level spell that can summon dead people. How in high fantasy, where it's almost mundane to the characters, some of the things they can do, how do you make things that are scary and supernatural to us, but just another Tuesday for your wizard scary?
I'm going to try and paraphrase that for the listening people later. How do you, in a high fantasy, make the occult in a system where the occult seems to be second nature, a scary concept to the players who are playing? Fair?
Yeah.
Right?
If your setting has a golden age tone, switching to the occult is kind of hard. Unless your players are keen to have the usual tools working less or not working, it might be difficult if they are, because they might seem like, oh, you're just taking away my character, which is something that I find annoying about 2nd edition of Ravenloft. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but essentially you wander around the countryside, the mist comes around, and all of a sudden you are in fantasy Wallachia, essentially you are just down Vlad's court. And you can't escape, which is very horror. But again, I didn't ask to be here. And my game master pulled it on me, and I was like, what? So yeah, it's
hard, but not impossible.
yeah.
One of the things you can always move to whenever you're doing a fantasy game is not taking things away, but giving things. I mean, talking to dead people, let's speak with the dead, right? Classic spell. You summon up a corpse, it goes, tell me 5 things, and it tells you 5 things. Well, what if it tells you 6? 5 of these things are true. The first 5 things probably, but what about the 6th? You don't know if that's true or false. You don't know how to deal with that. And that adds a layer of uncertainty, which is what you need from the occult. And what if the next time you use the spell, you get 7, and then 8? And what if one day you use it, and the corpse won't stop talking? It's a corpse, it's lying there, it's a dead guy. I mean, can you leave? You're the only person who can hear its last testimony. What do you do? And that makes it creepy because suddenly you're trapped. But it's up to you.
There is this whole thing about playing with the dead is always hilarious. In our last spell books, we have this spell called Licoscope, where you bring back to life a corpse, and it's alive. It's fine. Like, they're good, except they will start to rot while still being alive if you stop looking at them, and they know. I have a book of spells filled with stuff like that. The other thing, one of the war dogs of one of my players died in our D&D campaign, so they went to the local necromancer to bring it back, not knowing that it was like a proper necromancer, that rather than like a goth necromancer. Let's put it that way, like to transmit the kind of.
They went to a cut price necromancer,
heavily discounted. 50 gold for a sort of resurrection, and it brought back Ronan, and Ronan went back as a zombie. So it basically stays awake all night, staring at his dad. And the gnome of the party spoke with Ronan and says, "Hey, Ronan," because he can speak with animals. Ronan is an animal, a bit rotting. And Ronan was like, "Hey, Ronan, how is it?" I was like, "Oh, I love my dad, and I was okay to die for him, and then I died, and going over the threshold was terrible, and then I went to heaven, and the schwack was bad because I didn't have my dad, but dog heaven, fuck yeah." And then I was brought back, and the black guy, like the necromancer guy, like the black wizard, told me, my dad wants me back, and so I came back, and now every breath is pain, and I don't really breathe anymore, but I love pets. And the party, like, this is what I mean by the consequence of power. This is the outcomes. You kill a dog and you brought it back because you love him and he loves you, and everybody's okay with dog love. No, sorry, that's really bad. And everybody's okay with like pets being awesome and having them around. However, they are in a constant. They're in constant. Can I make this more awkward? I'll just stop.
You know what? Finish the line.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Just finish the line. You sure? Finish it.
Anyway, yeah. Now the zombie dog has more hit points than any of the party members.
I'm gonna go to the next question. I saw a hand there. I think it'll last. Oh, there's one in the back. Okay, I'm gonna try and get you all. 1, 2, 3. All right, we've really gotta cut this off. Start with you.
Okay, this is going back to something that you were talking about, Lloyd and Lynne, and also touched on stuff with Pablo. I really like in horror when instead of being the victim, it turns out maybe you were the monster all along. And I really like doing, and across various game systems, I really like doing things like you find out maybe in those weird dreams you were maybe out killing somebody, or maybe you're like, have you got any tips for pulling that kind of switcheroo on the players and actually totally corrupting them and turning the tables? And it maybe doesn't work in some games where they would then just run about and murder things. But when it's a proper kind of horror game, and that's like a really creepy result.
Summarizing that up, do you have tips for making it so it turns out you are the real monster all along, right? Thank you. Sorry.
It's something you can't do too often because obviously your players then come to expect it and it loses that power. Following on from what we were talking about for the last question, there was a legendary RuneQuest game that I was part of, and our characters were reasonably competent. And we ended up, we were hired to go and clear out this manor that had been, causing trouble. It was actually, we did this stupid idea of basing a whole load of scenarios on our favourite songs. And this one was actually the GM's, it was Hotel California. Only obviously we didn't know that going in. So of course, yes, we get round, we sort everything out, and it turns out that we've actually just gone round and released the vampire that the locals had managed to lock up in that place centuries ago, and now everybody hates us, and the vampire is taking special interest in us, and is just following us around, we never knew when she was going to turn up and cause mayhem. But she kept us alive because we were entertaining. And we'd freed her, so therefore she was kind of in debt to us. So yes, we ended up being the bad guys there because she'd actually hired us through a proxy, and we just ruined the villagers' lives by freeing their ancient enemy. And it can be really entertaining, it can be really unsettling. There's another one of the campaigns I've written where that does happen. I'm not going to say anything, I'm not going to do a full Samuel L. Jackson.
I'm sorry.
But it is fun to see that light dawning on your players' faces of, oh, bugger, basically. So, yeah, just don't overdo it is the main tip.
I think, trying to reveal, kind of you were the killers all along kind of rug pulls are difficult to pull off, and they're difficult in films as well, and I won't spoil any that do it this time, but what I would say is the key thing to making it work is not making it sudden. It's by utilizing and weaponizing sympathy. If you're kind of going through and your combats and the things that you're encountering for your players become increasingly more sympathetic, they have little question marks over them, being like, wait, why are we doing this? Like, why are we fighting this person? Why is that person dead? Like, it's basically having the strand of, if they are following a narrative where they believe that they're the good guys, use sympathy to erode that narrative to the point where you pull that rug out from underneath them. So I'd say sympathy is the biggest key for it.
We're really talking about a werewolf situation, where the person becomes a werewolf, and then suddenly they're off eating people. And a lot of these stories are basically Jekyll and Hyde. And one of the important things to realise about Jekyll and Hyde stories is that Jekyll is the villain. So it's not that, you find out you're the villain. It's that what you're doing is villainous. Now, it's very easy to roam around and, put on a uniform and, fighting the enemy. But to discover that, you're on the side of evil and you're doing the wrong thing, it comes from unearthing the mistruths you've been told, the lies that have motivated you. Imagine you're playing a cleric in a D&D game, and you're told by your god to go and slaughter all the orcs in a cave. You're not going to think twice about that. You're like, this is my storyline. It's a boring storyline. It's an old storyline. But how about 6 sessions later, when you discover that it wasn't your god, and that these voices you've been hearing, to justify acts of mass carnage, was in fact an imp, and everything you've done has been an apocalypse. That's how I'd say. That's how I'd do that.
I discussed dogs already. The trick is to make them the more long-term narrativist trick is what I would call, I think it's a Thanatos gambit. Essentially, there is this person that basically asks them to do stuff, and some of the consequences are like pieces of a puzzle or cogs that start to come together, and they're, you know, up there, but it's not really clear what they're doing until the very end when they all start to click.
It's
And-
carry a TV down the road.
And the other thing is to just outright, like, the last like Wizards game I played, one of the players found an old altar to Tzench, the chaos god of magic, and I asked him, what are you going to do for the next monthly turn of downtime? He was like, I'm just going to pray Tzench. And Tzench gave him like a boatload of essentially bennies to overpower whatever magic he was casting, and he just used them without restraint. Consequences be damned. Again, people find people when they are too attached to the outcomes will create monsters out of themselves. You know, there is that whole like means and consequences thing that at the moment I can't remember how to say. Can someone help me?
No, consequences is perfect.
No, it's like there is like yes, means justifies the end. Does mean justify the end? Yes. Congratulations, you created a monster. But dogs.
All right, I believe there are 2 more questions left. We're 3 questions left. Okay, everyone, you get 3 sentences. I'm watching you. Right, hands up for questions. All right, go with you, then you go.
Okay, what was the experience that got you into horror as a genre?
What was the experience of going to horror as a genre? 3 sentences, everyone.
Reading the Tombs of At-1 when I was 11.
That is a genuinely scary book.
It's terrifying. The mood shift from the first one to the second. The protagonist goes away. What the hell? You're in a bunch of catacombs. The catacombs are terrifying. You can die in so many different ways. Like, what is this?
That was sick.
Why am I here?
I'm just going to have to go with by accident.
I'd have to say when I was growing up, me, my brother, and my mum would go to one of those little old VHS shops to kind of rent films, and the top shelf with all the very bright, lurid, strange covers that were always out of reach always attracted me, and I ended up finding them once again in later life, and that's how I got into horror.
I got tricked into watching Nightmare on Elm Street.
Makes sense. One last question. I think we had one more.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up?
Just asking for tips on introducing horror into games, but when you're playing digitally, like over Zoom, so props not going to be necessarily easy to get there.
Tips on horror over digital media because you don't have access to physical props. Go.
It is a lot harder. Engage senses, so smells, in your descriptions, so smells, sounds. Take tips from sort of like the really good horror filmmakers in the fact that less is more in terms of your descriptions. Don't just outright say, there's a thing that looks like this. It's like, all you can see may be a strange shaped shadow. You've really got to work a lot harder on building atmosphere over a video call, but it can be done.
I'd say definitely I'm a big fan of music, ambiences, soundscapes, especially if you can kind of get that so it's playing kind of in synchronicity for all your players. Sound can be something that you can easily stream across multiple players and can very much help ground things when you don't have that grounding of people at a table. So that would be one of my main recommendations.
I don't have anything to say. I'm terrible at online gaming.
I'm not a big online gamer. I prefer in person. But when needs must, if I'm trying to push horror virtually, then I'll do it with the webcam. I will tilt it so that it's just offline, just a little bit. Because then I'm not talking to you, I'm talking over here. And that can get unnerving very quickly. And then when you turn to face people, You look straight into the camera because they've not noticed that their attention is in the camera. And if you can catch them all at once, a quick move of the head is enough to jar people. And sometimes little simple things like this, like you can use a tap to set a tempo. And you can build from that. And you can do little small things that aren't out there, but they're very minor, and they build to a rhythm.
That's almost all we have time for. Just before we all go, do you people all give a quick fire of book recommendations or media representations people can read to help them bring occult and horror to the water they're playing in now?
I'm going to say, if you want to watch something, go for The Others, the Nicole Kidman one. That is creepy as all heck, and is going to give you some really good ideas for how you can terrify your players and their characters.
I'd say in terms of authors, kind of like going for your classics like Stephen King and Clive Barker. I'm a massive fan of Stephen Graham Jones, who wrote My Heart is a Chainsaw. If you're big into kind of horror as a genre, definitely explore that. Obviously, go watch Deep Blue Sea. I would say like horror is having a massive revival at the minute, so get out in your cinemas, support the films there, and we'll keep seeing new stuff being brought to the table. But it's got to have people going out and support it. So that's what I would say.
I'm going to be very basic. Watch The Witch, watch Hereditary, watch A Little Gem. No, it's terrible, but guilty pleasure. The series of John Constantine, I think it's still on Netflix or Disney Plus, I can't remember. Because there is a good horror wizard that is protagonist, and it's like a sort of good protagonist. Also, read the Tombs of Atuan and possibly all of Earthsea. If you want a non-fiction book to read something on what's called the Greek magical papyri, and there are some real-world magic left us from I think like 400 BC to 400 AC, essentially like Middle Eastern, Greek, Egyptian mixture of magic. So like often there is both Christ and Egyptian gods in the same spell. It's eye-opening.
I'm a simple soul, and if you can stand gore, I heartily recommend Hellraiser. But don't watch it for the gore. Watch it for the romance story. Watch it realizing you're watching a romance. And then when it gets to the end and the reveal happens, go, yes, he's in the right.
And on that note, everyone, thank you much for coming to my panel. Have a great night.
I think you just rocked someone's world there, Ben.
Yeah.
You know it, right?
Oh, thank you so much. Cheers. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah, Razor as a love story. You know? Yeah.
This man who's basically dead, he's basically an abusive ex. It's a love story. It's just an awful love story.
It's a terrible one. It's a warning from history love story. Yeah.
My favorite.
Sorry about the foot-in-mouth disease.
No, you're fine.
Makes a good deal.
Appreciate it. Thanks for coming here.